Welcome back to Mental Minute, everyone. I am so excited for today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling a concept that is super sneaky and, honestly, kind of fascinating at the same time. It's confirmation bias.
Ooh, confirmation bias.
Yeah, you know that feeling when you find an article or something that perfectly supports, like, exactly what you believe?
Oh, yeah.
And you think to yourself, see, I knew it all along. Like, it's almost like magic, right?
Totally. That's confirmation bias at work.
It is. It's like our brain's way of kind of like favoring information that reinforces what we already believe.
Yeah.
And then it just conveniently ignores anything that challenges those beliefs.
Yeah, it's like having our own personal little cheering squad up in our brains, just constantly validating every thought we have.
Right.
But the thing is, it can have some pretty significant consequences out in the real world.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what we are going to be talking about today in our deep dive into confirmation bias. So what exactly is going on in our brains when this confirmation bias takes over?
Okay, well, first, it operates on multiple levels. So first, it starts with how we search for information. So imagine you're researching a topic, like a controversial topic, right? Are you really looking at every side of the argument, or are you subconsciously just like drawn to the sources that kind of already align with what you think?
Well, I know that I've definitely been guilty of that, you know.
Happens to the best of us.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of searching for evidence that just supports what you believe.
Totally. And that's just the first hurdle. Even when presented with the exact same information, people who have like different viewpoints will often interpret it in wildly different ways.
Oh, so you mean like how two people can watch the same news report or something, but then come away with totally opposite interpretations?
Exactly.
Right.
Like it's almost like our brains are trying to keep everything internally consistent, even if it means that we have to like bend reality a little bit.
So it's not just about the information we choose to see. It's like how we choose to see it, too.
Oh, it is. And then to make things even more complex, our memories, right? They're not exactly like neutral observers either.
Wait, what?
Yeah. We're more likely to remember information that supports our beliefs. And then we very conveniently forget the things that contradict them.
So you're telling me our memories are biased, too.
Yeah.
That is a little unsettling.
Think about it like this. Our memories aren't like perfect recordings of the past. They're much more like narratives that we just constantly kind of reshape and edit to fit our current understanding of the world.
So we're almost like the authors of our own like personal history books.
Yeah.
And we're carefully choosing what events to highlight and which ones to just leave out.
That is such a great analogy.
Yikes.
It really highlights how confirmation bias cannot just like influence our present perceptions, you know. It can really influence our understanding of our own past experiences.
Okay, so we've established confirmation bias as like this sneaky mental thing that can like distort our perceptions and memories and all this.
Right.
But why do we do it? Why do we do this to ourselves?
You know, honestly, I don't think it's like having an evolutionary advantage of anything like that.
Okay.
It's more about how our brains are wired to make sense of this world that is so complex.
Yeah.
We're constantly being bombarded with information, and our brains have developed these shortcuts
Okay.
to help us process it all efficiently.
So confirmation bias is kind of like a mental shortcut that's gone wrong.
If you could see it that way, yeah.
All right.
It's a way for our brains to conserve energy, you know, maintain a sense of order
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess
and
so.
predictability. And honestly, it's easier to just stick with what we know, even if it's not totally accurate,
Yeah.
than to constantly question everything.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But isn't there a danger in like clinging too tightly to our beliefs when they could be based on like faulty information?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to be aware of it.
Yeah.
The first step to overcoming any bias is to recognize that it exists.
So self-awareness is key. I want to hear some real-world examples of how this all plays out.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's start with social media.
Okay. Yeah.
Social media is often called a breeding ground for confirmation bias.
Right, because social media algorithms are curating our feeds,
Right.
showing us content that aligns with what we've looked at before. So it's easy to see how we could end up in echo chambers.
Exactly. So, like, imagine you're really passionate about a social or political issue. You might find yourself gravitating towards groups and pages that share your views. And then the algorithms are going to keep feeding you stuff that reinforces those beliefs.
It's like being trapped in this feedback loop
Exactly.
where we're only seeing one side.
And this can have some really serious consequences, especially when it comes to the spread of misinformation. When people are only consuming information that aligns with their existing beliefs, it becomes so hard to have productive conversations.
Yeah, it's hard to even find common ground, I would think.
Right?
So it seems like social media can be like a double-edged sword.
It is.
It could help us connect with like-minded people
Yeah.
and stay informed about things that we care about. But it can also limit our exposure
It
to
can.
different perspectives.
Totally.
And that make us more susceptible to misinformation.
Exactly. So the key is to be aware
Yeah.
and actively work to diversify your online experience.
Okay, now I'm imagining confirmation bias isn't just limited to the digital world.
Oh, no, definitely not.
It affects all sorts of decisions.
It does. Confirmation bias can influence anything, like the investments we make,
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah.
medical diagnoses we receive.
So, for example, I've heard that investors can fall victim to confirmation bias
Yeah.
by only paying attention to news that, supports their belief in a particular stock.
Yeah, that's a classic example. Investors, especially those who are emotionally invested in a stock, can get so fixated on the positive information that they just ignore all the red flags, all the warning signs, and then that leads to bad financial decisions.
So when it comes to finances, a little bit of skepticism can go a long way.
It really can. It's about recognizing that our intuition can sometimes be clouded by our own biases.
Yeah. Now, what about in medicine? I would think that confirmation bias could have some serious implications in the medical field.
Oh, yeah. It could be a matter of life or death in medicine.
Wow.
So imagine a doctor who has kind of prematurely settled on a diagnosis.
Okay.
Confirmation bias might lead them to only focus on the evidence that supports their initial assessment,
Right.
and they could potentially miss other things that point to something else completely different.
So a misdiagnosis could have, really devastating consequences for a patient.
And especially emergency medicine, right? When time is critical,
Yeah.
the stakes are even higher.
So even with professionals, confirmation bias is still a huge challenge.
It is. And that's why it's crucial for them to be aware of it and actively try to counteract it.
It's almost like confirmation bias has its tentacles in every part of human experience.
It kind of does, and its influence doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
It can lead to some fascinating, sometimes troubling outcomes, like the polarization of opinions, the persistence of beliefs that have been debunked. So one of the most striking outcomes of confirmation bias is something called attitude polarization.
Attitude polarization. That sounds kind of intense.
It really is. It's this tendency for people with opposing views to just become more dug in, more entrenched, even when they are presented with the same evidence.
Oh, wow. So instead of coming together, people are just getting further apart.
Exactly. It's like watching two magnets repel each other.
Okay.
The more information they get, the further apart they drift.
Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah. So there's this classic experiment. People had to guess which of two hidden baskets red and black balls were being drawn from. And get this, the people who openly stated their beliefs about the basket actually became more confident in their guesses.
Oh, wow.
Even when the sequence of the balls didn't really favor either basket.
So even when the evidence is totally neutral,
Right.
just saying your opinion out loud can make you more extreme in your views.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
Wow.
The act of just saying it out loud, committing to a belief, can strengthen it.
Even if there aren't facts to support it.
Even then.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, our brains are really good at protecting our sense of certainty, even when that certainty is not accurate.
Okay, so we've got attitude polarization. What else?
Okay, let's talk about belief perseverance.
Belief perseverance.
This is the tendency for beliefs to persist even after the evidence that supported them is totally debunked, gone.
So, holding onto a life raft even after the ship has sunk.
The perfect analogy.
Yeah.
There's this really famous study about a cult. They believed the world was going to end on a specific date. And even after the prediction failed, most of the members still held on to their beliefs.
They did?
They did. They found ways to rationalize the failed prophecy.
Wow. So our need to believe can be more powerful than,
It really can.
Our minds are so good at finding ways to maintain this sense of order and meaning, even when the facts contradict it.
That's wild. Okay. So we talked about attitude polarization. We've talked about belief perseverance. Are there any other, consequences of confirmation bias?
There is one more. It's called illusory correlation.
Illusory correlation.
And that is the tendency to see a relationship between two events or variables when there really is no connection.
Okay, I think I need an example on this one.
Sure. Think about people who think that their arthritis pain is related to the weather. Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
Right. Studies show that there's often no link
Okay.
but people will still insist that their joints ache more when it rains.
Yeah, I have heard people say that.
Mhm.
So even if it's not true, our brains just try to find the patterns.
Yeah, it's probably this, like, leftover trait
Right.
from way back when
Okay.
recognizing patterns, even if they were not real,
Right.
could have helped with survival.
So even though that illusory correlation can, like, lead us astray, it's a reminder that our brains are always trying to make sense of the world.
Exactly. So now that we've kind of discussed some of the consequences of this, the
Yeah.
question is, what do we do about it? How can we, like, lessen these effects?
Yeah, we've spent all this time talking about how sneaky it is.
Right.
It's got to be something we can do.
Well, the first step, like we said, is just realizing that confirmation bias exists
Okay.
and that it affects all of us.
So awareness is key. But then how do we take that awareness and make better decisions?
One way is to actively seek out different opinions. You know?
Oh, okay, yeah. Like go out of our way to talk to people
Go out of your way, yeah.
with different opinions. That can be hard.
It can, but it's essential
Yep.
being a critical thinker.
It keeps our beliefs from becoming too, like, rigid.
It really does. What about when you're already in a situation where you think this might be affecting your judgment?
Oh, yeah. What do you do then?
Practice intellectual humility,
Okay, intellectual humility.
which is being open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
So just admit it when I'm wrong.
Yep.
I mean,
It's essential for learning and growth.
but it's hard
It is hard.
to admit when you're wrong.
It is. But if we just hold on to our beliefs too tightly, you know, even when there's evidence against them,
Yeah.
we miss out on learning and growing.
So intellectual humility, it means being open to new information, being willing to kind of adjust those beliefs when you need to.
Exactly.
Okay. What else can we do?
Another thing is
Yeah.
critical thinking.
I feel like I've heard that term a lot,
Right.
but what does it really mean?
It's evaluating information carefully, questioning those assumptions, and then looking for the evidence.
So basically, don't just blindly accept things.
Right. Don't just blindly accept things.
Think critically.
Exactly. And when you are evaluating things, watch your emotions.
Okay. So how do emotions play into that?
If you notice yourself getting really defensive or really excited about some information,
Yeah.
that could be a sign.
Okay.
Your biases are at work.
So if we're feeling very strongly about something,
Yes.
maybe take a step back.
Take a step back.
Okay.
Recognize that we're emotional beings.
Yeah. This has been really enlightening. It's amazing how subtle this can be, but also how much of an impact it has on everything.
Right. It shows how complex our minds are
Yeah.
and the importance of understanding our own thought processes.
I feel like I've learned a lot today, not just about confirmation bias, but also some strategies for dealing with it.
And that's what's important.
Okay, so we've explored the what, the
Mhm.
why, the how, but before we wrap up, I just want to touch on one last thing. Is it even possible to be totally objective? Can we really escape the influence of our biases?
That's a really great question.
Thanks.
And philosophers and psychologists have been debating this for years. And while perfect objectivity is probably impossible,
Okay.
that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try.
So it's more about progress over perfection.
Exactly.
So it sounds like, while total objectivity is,
Right.
maybe not something we can reach,
Yeah,
it's something we should always be going for.
definitely. The more we know about our biases, the better decisions we can make.
It's like we're shining a light on these shortcuts our brain takes.
Yeah, exactly. And once we can see them,
Yeah.
we can start to, like, question them,
Yeah.
challenge them,
Yeah.
and ultimately make more conscious choices.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking about all the ways confirmation bias might be, like
Yep.
popping up in my life.
Totally.
Everything, from the news I read
Right.
to the decisions I make.
That's the point of this deep dive, right?
Yeah.
It's not to eliminate confirmation bias, but to just be aware of it.
So basically hone those critical thinking skills.
Right, and be willing to get out of your comfort zone.
I think that's a really great message to leave with everyone.
Yeah.
We all have biases,
We do.
but by understanding them,
Yeah.
we can
Right.
start to break free.
We can. Confirmation bias is totally normal. It's how our brains make sense of the world,
Yeah.
but we don't have to let it control us.
Yeah, we can make thoughtful choices
We can.
and be discerning with the information we take in.
Right.
Well said.
Thanks.
Okay, so this has been such a great deep dive. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And To all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us for Mental Minute. We hope this deep dive into confirmation bias was super helpful. And like we always say, stay curious, stay open-minded,
Yeah.
and never stop learning.